Rowan hadn't woken up this morning expecting to become the Alpha King's personal pillow. But here she was, his weight pressed into her shoulder, his breath slow and deep against the side of her neck, each exhale sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with cold and everything to do with the fact that this was insane. The king of the realm, the man who had ended the mountain war through sheer brutality and tactical brilliance, was asleep on her. She could feel the rise and fall of his chest where his shoulder touched hers. Could see things no one was ever meant to see, like how unfairly long his lashes were. The entire council chamber had gone silent. 15 men sat frozen in their seats, staring at her. Councillor Brannon's mouth hung open mid-sentence. A servant in the corner clutched a water pitcher like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Rowan did not dare breathe. This was not how the afternoon was supposed to go. Councillor Brannon's knee had been swelling again. The stubborn old fool refused to come down to the infirmary. So Mistress Silvera had set Rowan up with a poultice and strict instructions to make sure he actually applied it. Simple. But then the council's discussion had shifted to contaminated grain stores, and someone who had recognized her as the infirmary herbalist had asked her opinion on treatment. Before she could process what was happening, she had been waved forward to sit beside the king himself and explain proper fumigation techniques for moldy grain. Walking toward him had been the most terrifying 30 seconds of her life. Her pulse a wild, fluttering thing in her throat. King Leander Martell was absurdly tall and broad-shouldered, in a way that suggested he could snap a man's spine without breaking a sweat. The sheer physical presence of him was crushing. The dark gray eyes of the king's eyes were as if they were looking at him. The gray eyes that had locked onto her as she approached had made her forget how to make her legs work properly. She had lowered herself onto the bench beside him, and Shed had to grip her hands together in her lap to keep them from shaking. His gaze was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, her chest, making it hard to pull in a full breath. It had been the most unnerving 2 minutes of her life. And then she had seen it. The deep, bruised shadows beneath his eyes. The hollow carved into his cheeks that shouldn't have been there on a man his age. The rumor said His Majesty never slept. Looking at him up close, Rowan had believed every word. But she had not expected his breathing to deepen as she spoke, or for his head to tip slowly until his temple came to rest against her shoulder. The moment his weight settled against her, the world narrowed to the warmth of him soaking through her sleeve. The impossible reality that the Alpha King had just passed out on a nobody herbalist in front of his entire council. Panic arrived a beat later. What was she supposed to do? The silence spread like spilled water, and now every single person in the room was staring at her with varying degrees of shock. Corbin, the king's beta, rose slowly from his seat and mouthed very clearly, "Whatever you do, do not move." Rowan's eyes went wide. Easy for him to say. He didn't have a mountain of a warlord pinning him to a wooden bench while needing to sneeze. She held her breath. The urge retreated. Barely. 20 minutes crawled by like 20 years. Her shoulder ached. Her spine had gone stiff. She stared straight ahead at the moth-eaten banner on the opposite wall, and tried to think about anything other than the fact that the king's hair was softer than she had expected. His weight only grew heavier as he sank deeper into sleep, and she sent Corbin a desperate, imploring look. The beta leaned forward slightly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. The Alpha never sleeps. Certainly not for so long. Rowan blinked at him. So long? It had been 20 minutes. A lifetime to her, maybe. but hardly what anyone would call a proper rest. She glanced down at the king, at the way sleep had softened the hard line of his mouth into something almost gentle. Something in her chest did an odd, uncomfortable twist. Fine. She could sit a little longer. Eventually, after what genuinely felt like an hour, Corbin rose and gestured. A guard approached, moving with the exaggerated caution of a man trying not to wake a sleeping wolf. And together, they eased the king back against his chair. The moment his weight lifted, Rowan nearly sobbed with relief. Corbin waved her toward the door. "Corbin?" She stood on shaking legs and fled. She made it maybe 2 minutes down the corridor before the beta caught up with her. "The king is already waking," Corbin said low and urgent. Rowan stared at him, wondering what she was meant to say to that. "My condolences," she offered. The look Corbin gave her suggested that was not the right thing to say. "What did you do?" he asked. "How did you manage it?" "Manage what?" Rowan asked. "How did you make him sleep?" Rowan gaped at him. "I didn't do anything. I just sat there." The beta's expression didn't shift, but the silence that followed felt far too heavy. "People fall asleep sometimes," Rowan added, suddenly nervous. "Not him," Corbin muttered. A chill crawled down her spine. "Are the rumors true then, the ones that say he doesn't sleep?" Corbin ignored the question. "Stay in the castle," he said instead. "Don't leave the grounds. I'll be in touch shortly." "Wait, do you think?" Rowan hesitated. "Is he going to be angry?" "I don't know how the king will react," Corbin said quietly, "so don't tell anyone what happened here, understood?" He left before she could respond. Rowan stood alone in the empty corridor, her pulse still racing, and felt the first cold flicker of genuine fear. She hadn't thought the king would be angry with her. It wasn't her fault had fallen asleep, but if he was embarrassed and looking for someone to blame, her stomach twisted. That night she dreamed of being dragged to the executioner's block for crimes against the crown, specifically being the king's pillow. And not a very comfortable one either, the king said in her dream. Right before the axe fell, she woke with her heart pounding and her sheets twisted around her legs like a noose. The morning light was still gray and thin when someone knocked on her door. A guard stood in the corridor, his face carefully blank. "You're being summoned," he said, "by the king himself." Chapter 1. The waiting room was small, windowless, and smelled faintly of old wood and anxiety. When Corbin stepped inside, Rowan's heart lurched into her throat. "Miss Rowan," Corbin said, his voice calm, too calm. "Thank you for waiting. Is it true him being summoned by the king?" Rowan gulped. "Almost," the beta replied. "Eve summoned you in his name. Would you be willing to sit with the king during a private meeting?" He paused. "An experiment, if you will." She stared at him. "Why?" It came out as a squeak. Corbin didn't answer. The walk to the king's office felt like a funeral march. Rowan's pulse hammered in her ears with every step. "He's going to recognize me. He's going to remember. He's going to know I was the one who accidentally made him sleep like a baby in public." Somehow Corbin stopped at a heavy oak door and pushed it open. The air was thick with old parchment, the narrow windows letting in only thin gray light that seemed to die before it reached the corners and behind. The desk had bent over. A report sat King Leander Martell. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the door opening, didn't acknowledge Corbin's presence, didn't so much as twitch when Rowan stepped inside. "Does he know?" she wondered. "Does he remember what happened yesterday? Is he mad at me here?" Corbin murmured, gesturing to a chair along the wall, though it creaked beneath her weight as she sat. But the king kept reading, his face a mask of controlled focus. He paid her no attention. Rowan pressed her hands together in Her lap the fire crackled, the clock on the mantel ticked. The king turned another page. Maybe he doesn't know, she thought. Maybe Corbin didn't tell him. 2 advisors entered, followed by a third. They spoke in low voices, and the king listened without looking up, asked questions in a low voice, made notes in the margins of his reports. Rowan watched the clock, counted the second. 10 minutes passed, then 10 more. The king's pen stilled on the page just for a moment. A brief hesitation, like had lost his train of thought. Then he shook his head slightly and kept writing. Oh, no, Rowan thought. 5 more minutes, and Leander's head dipped. It was subtle, just a slight forward tilt that he caught immediately. He blinked, hard-pressed his fingers to his temple, and forced his attention back to the document in front of him. One of the advisors was speaking. The king nodded at something, but his eyes had gone slightly unfocused. Rowan's pulse roared in her ears. She couldn't look away. His head dipped again, slower this time, and he didn't catch it as quickly. His hand went slack around the pen. The advisor finished his sentence and waited for a response. The king's eyes closed. His head tipped forward, came to rest on his folded arms atop the desk, and his breathing deepened into something slow and steady and utterly, impossibly peaceful. The room went silent. The advisor stared. One of them opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then seemed to think better of it. Another turned to look at Corbin with wide eyes. The beta stood motionless by the door, his gaze fixed on the king. One of the advisors shifted his weight. The beta's gaze snapped to him, sharp and warning, and the man froze. Minutes crawled by, then an hour, then 2. The advisors filtered out one by one, and the office fell into heavy silence. Just Rowan, the beta, and the king. She didn't dare move. Finally, Corbin turned to her. "You can go," he said quietly. Rowan stood on shaking legs and fled. She stumbled back to the infirmary, her mind a chaotic mess of half-formed fears. He fell asleep. Twice. During meetings. And I was there both times. What if he thought she'd seen too much? What if falling asleep in front of his counsel was some kind of weakness he couldn't afford anyone to witness? Kings didn't just pass out at their desks. That wasn't normal. And she'd been there. She'd seen it. Mistress Silvara was grinding something at the workbench when Rowan pushed through the door. "What happened?" she asked, like she could read minds. Rowan opened her mouth. No sound came out. "Rowan!" Silvara said, her voice sharpening. "Breathe." "What happened?" "The king fell asleep," Rowan managed. Silvara's eyebrows rose. "The beta brought me to him. I went to his office and told me to sit there. And I sat in a chair and didn't move, and the king was working, and then he passed out," Rowan said. "It happened yesterday too. He fell asleep on my shoulder." Her voice cracked. "What if he's angry I saw that?" "Rowan," Silvara said, moving around the workbench. "Relax. Sit down." "I can't sit down. I need to." "Sit." Rowan sat. Silvara crossed to the door, glanced into the corridor, then shut it firmly. "What I'm about to tell you does not leave this room," she said. Rowan's stomach dropped. "That's never a good start," she whined. "The rumors are true," Silvara continued. "The king doesn't sleep. Not properly. Not for more than a few minutes at a time. It's been this way since he returned from the mountain war. Over a year now. A year? Rowan gasped. We've tried everything, Silvera said. Every herb in my stores, every potion, every remedy I know. Her mouth thinned into a hard line. Nothing works. He closes his eyes, and something drags him back within minutes. Every single time. Rowan's mind reeled. That's not possible. A year without sleep would kill a normal man, yes, Silvera said, her gaze sharpening. He's an alpha, a shifter. That's kept him alive this long. But even he has limits. The beta fears he won't survive another 6 months. He's been helping the king hide this from court, but the floor seemed to tilt beneath Rowan's feet. But he slept yesterday, she whispered, for almost an hour. And today? Silvera asked. 2 hours, Rowan said. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush her. What herbs were you working with yesterday? Silvera asked suddenly. Before the council meeting. What were you carrying on your person? Rowan blinked at the abrupt shift. Willowbark. The poultice for Councillor Brannon's knee. Some dried lavender I'd been sorting earlier in the day. Nothing unusual. Why? Silvera shook her head. And today, what were you carrying today? Nothing. Rowan said. I wasn't working with anything. Silvera moved to her shelves. Scent. Base sedatives are rare, but they exist if something in your natural scent or perhaps a residue from the herbs you handle regularly. Wait, Rowan said, her voice strangled. So you think he fell asleep because of me? Silvera paused, turned to look at her. Don't you? She asked. Rowan bit her lip. She'd rather hoped she'd been at the wrong place at the wrong time, but now that Silvera said it out loud, she realized that's what the beta thought. That's why had brought her to the office today. Oh gods, Rowan whispered. A knock sounded at the door. They both froze. Silvera opened it to reveal Corbin's. In the corridor, Miss Rowan, Corbin said politely. A word, please. Rowan's legs felt like water as she stepped outside. The king woke less than a minute after you left his office, Corbin announced. The implication settled over her like a physical weight. Like yesterday, she said. Corbin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Does the king know? She asked. Oh yes, Corbin said calmly. He knows, and he's requiring your presence tonight at sunset in his private chambers. Rowan's heart stopped. Chapter 2. That evening, a guard led Rowan through corridors she'd never walked before. The upper levels of the palace where nobles kept their chambers and servants knew better than to linger. Why am I being summoned to his room? She thought. The possibilities spiraled through her mind, and her thoughts took a sharp, mortifying turn. What if he wanted her in his bed? She shook her head. No, absolutely not. Kings didn't summon random herbalists for that. But she couldn't help it. She imagined him asking her to unlace her dress, his voice low and commanding, his hands. Rowan's face burned. The guard stopped at a set of carved wooden doors and knocked once. Enter came the king's voice from inside the king's chambers were the largest room she had ever stood in. Weapons hung on the walls, swords about a shield bearing the martel crest, and in the center of it all, impossible to ignore, the bed. It was enormous, and the sight of it made Rowan's stomach drop because it was his bed, and she was standing 5 feet away from it, and she had no idea why he was standing by the window. But hearing her arrive, he turned. Your Majesty, I'm so sorry, Rowan exclaimed. I promise I won't tell anyone you fell asleep on my shoulder. The king frowned. What? He asked. I mean, Rowan barreled on. I did tell Silvera, but she already knew you had trouble sleeping because she's a healer, and I did not tell her. You sort of drooled. There was a beat of absolute silence, then the king cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said, looking distinctly uncomfortable. It was the first time Head addressed her directly. His voice was lower than Shed expected, quieter, and it sent a shiver down her spine. Another beat of silence. He crossed his arms. The movement drew her attention to the breadth of his shoulders. "This is a practical arrangement," he said. His tone clipped. "No one speaks of this outside these rooms." "Is that understood?" Rowan nodded, mutely wondering what exactly was the arrangement. "Sire, am not." She flushed, heat crawling up her neck. He frowned. "You're not what I'm saving myself for marriage," Rowan blurted out, her voice coming out louder and more defensive than Shed intended. The king blinked at her slowly. "What do you think is going to happen here?" he asked. Rowan opened her mouth, closed it, had absolutely no idea what to say, and it must have shown on her face because he added, sounding almost startled, "You'll sleep here, you'll sleep here." That's all. Rowan's gaze dropped. At the foot of the massive bed, someone had set up a narrow pallet with a thin pillow and a blanket that looked borrowed from the servants' quarters. "Oh," she said, her voice small. "Of course," she thought. "He's the king, he could have anyone. You? Someone beautiful, someone appropriate." She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Rowan moved to the pallet and knelt down, smoothing the blanket with quick practice movements. "What time do you retire, Your Majesty?" she asked. "When I can no longer avoid it," he replied. "And do you have a preference for candlelight or dark?" she asked, not looking up. "Dark." His voice came from closer than she'd expected. She glanced up and found Head moved to the other side of the bed. "Would you like the fire bank?" she asked. He sighed, and the sound was so bone-deep tired it made her chest ache. "No." Rowan nodded and sat back on her heels, unsure what to do with her hands. With herself, the king crossed to the bed and sat on the edge of it. The mattress dipped under his weight. Rowan watched his hands settle on his thighs, watched the way his shoulders stayed rigid. "Even sitting down, you're not even going to remove your jacket?" she asked. His gaze cut to her, sharp and unreadable. Rowan nodded quickly. "That's fine." "You do, sire." Something flickered across his face, the ghost of amusement. But it was gone before she could name it. He lay back on the bed, boots and all, and stared at the ceiling. Rowan stood and moved to the candles. Her hand shook as she pinched out the flames. One by one, the room dimmed. She lay down on the pallet, her back rigid, her hands folded on her stomach, and tried not to think about the fact that she could hear him breathing deep, controlled breaths in and out, steady and deliberate. Minutes passed. She counted them, tried to focus on the rhythm of the fire crackling. Rowan stared at the ceiling and tried to relax. Failed completely. More minutes passed. The king's breathing changed. It was subtle, a slight deepening, a loosening in the rhythm. Rowan turned her head carefully and looked toward the bed. His hand had gone slack against the mattress. The rigid tension in his shoulders had eased. He was asleep. 20 minutes. That's all it had taken. The fire crackled, casting shifting light across his face, and Rowan couldn't look away. He was beautiful. The fire burned lower. The light shifted from gold to amber to deep red. His breathing stayed steady. Rowan watched the rise and fall of his chest and felt something settle in her own. A strange sort of wonder. She was still watching him when his breathing changed again. Not deeper. Rougher. Rowan sat up, her pulse spiking. The king's head turned sharply to one side. His hands clenched into fists against the sheets. A low sound escaped his throat, and his entire body went rigid. He was having a nightmare. Rowan scrambled to her feet on instinct and reached for his shoulder without thinking. "Your Majesty?" She blinked, and when her eyes opened, she was somewhere else. Somewhere cold, surrounded by fog, thick and gray and utterly still, pressing in from all sides. The air smelled of damp stone and ash. Trees surrounded her, but they weren't right. Too tall, too skeletal, their branches reaching like fingers against the white sky. "Where am I?" The words came out as a whisper. The silence was suffocating. No wind, no birdsong, nothing. Except something moved in the fog. A presence. Patient. Hungry. Aware. "Hello?" Rowan called out, her heart hammering. Her voice disappeared into the fog like it had been swallowed. Rowan turned. The king stood 10 feet away, staring into the fog. At the thing she couldn't see, his face was expressionless, but his hands were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. "Your Majesty?" Rowan called out. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge her. "Your Majesty?" She took a step toward him, panic rising in her throat. The thing in the fog was closer now. She could hear it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming through the trees. The king didn't react. Rowan grabbed his hand and pulled. She blinked, and they were back. The king's chambers. The dying fire. The warm amber light. Rowan was standing beside the bed. Rowan. Her hand still on the king's arm, he was asleep beside her, his breathing steady again, his face peaceful like nothing had happened. She pulled her hand back slowly, her heart racing, and stared down at him. What just happened? She wondered out loud. Chapter 3. Rowan's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim gray light of early morning. The king was staring at her. He stood by the window, fully dressed, silhouetted against the pale dawn light. She sat up quickly. "Your Majesty, is something wrong?" He seemed to startle slightly, and a faint flush crept up his neck. "Not at all," he said. There was a pause, awkward and heavy. "Then this arrangement continues until further notice. The infirmary will manage your absence during the evenings." Rowan blinked at him, still half asleep. "You?" Trying to process the words, had slept through the night. No more thrashing, no more nightmares. Or had there been a nightmare? Had she imagined the whole thing, that strange foggy place? "So, you slept well then?" she asked, carefully searching his face. The king's flush deepened, and he looked away toward the window. "Yes, thank you." He cleared his throat, and she watched his Adam's apple bob. "Thank you for your services," he added. His discomfort was so palpable she could feel it across the room. "My pleasure, Your Majesty," Rowan said, then caught herself. "I mean not pleasure. That came out wrong. What I meant to say is..." She gestured vaguely at the pallet. "I'm going to need a better pillow." "That one is an insult to the concept of pillows." The corner of his mouth twitched. She returned to the infirmary in a daze, her mind still tangled around the strangeness of the night before. "What happened?" Silvara asked. Rowan told her everything. Well, almost everything. She left out the strange vision of fog and black water. That was clearly an anxiety-induced fever, dream brought on by the sheer absurdity of sleeping in the Alpha King's chambers. Before Shed finished, Corbett appeared in the doorway. "The king is quite pleased," the Beta said to Silvara. "We need to understand why this is working. If there's a way to replicate it, to create a cure." Silvara nodded. "I'll look into it." Corbin's gaze shifted back to Rowan. In the meantime, you'll continue. Same arrangement, every evening. Clearly, Rowan didn't have a choice, and soon a rhythm formed. In the mornings, Rowan woke before Leander. Or at least she tried to. But she found herself lingering longer each day, watching him sleep in the gray dawn light. She'd slip out before he woke, dress quietly, and return to the infirmary before the palace stirred. During the days, she did not see him. Their lives did not overlap. He ruled a kingdom. She treated burns and stomach complaints and sprained ankles. In the evenings, she arrived at his chambers after the palace had settled, set up her things on the narrow bed that had replaced the pallet, and tried to make conversation. He mostly ignored her or replied in grunts. Then they slept. No more nightmares. No more strange dreams of foggy places and patient, hungry things in the dark. Nothing strange. Though, a candle did appear on the table nearest her bed, and now, the fire was always stoked before she got there. "Thank you for the candle," she said one evening as she unpinned her hair. The king glanced up from the report he was reading. "What candle?" "The one you leave burning for me." His ears went slightly pink, and Rowan bit back a smile. Later, she could hear him awake in the dark, making the sound of someone whose body refused to cooperate no matter how desperately it needed rest. So without really deciding to, Rowan started talking. Not about anything important. She told him about the apprentice who'd mixed up the yarrow and the feverfew last year and given a guardsman a poultice that turned his arm temporarily purple. She didn't know when he stopped shifting and fell asleep. But in the morning, he asked, the apprentice, the one with the purple arm, "Did the color fade?" Rowan stared at him. Had been listening. He remembered. 3 days, she said. But the apprentice got in so much trouble. Leander was quiet for a moment. But the apprentice got in so much trouble. Leander was quiet for a moment. But the apprentice got in so much trouble. Then the apprentice was you, wasn't it? He asked. Rowan froze. What? No. I would never. He just looked at her, one eyebrow raised slightly. Yes. She admitted, yes, it was me. But in my defense, the king began to laugh. Rowan stared at him, startled and transfixed. Then she smiled. We believe it's the scent, Silvara told her. After a few weeks, Rowan blinked. The scent. The court healers have consulted the old records. There are precedents, rare but documented, of wolves whose natural pheromonal signature carries a sedative property. She explained, an omega-adjacent calming effect combined with the herbal residue you carried, lavender chamomile, it seems, to create something the curse cannot override it. Close range. Silvara paused. The data suggests that maintaining physical contact through the night would give him the deepest, most sustained sleep. She added, the implication hung in the air. Are you saying I should cuddle the king? Rowan asked. Silvera's expression didn't flicker. Him saying, if you want to help him, you need to start sleeping closer to him. Leander resisted the suggestion. Predictably, he was not going to be coddled. He was not an infant who needed holding. The refusal lasted 2 days. On the second night, he had a bad nightmare, and Rowan took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, desperate tight, and within minutes, the nightmare released him. In the morning, he said, fine, just that. But now Rowan was preparing herself to sleep in the king's bed. She stood in his chambers that evening, staring at the massive piece of furniture like it might swallow her whole. You have 4 pillows, she said, arranged in a fortress-like configuration. Is that a problem? Leander asked. Rowan opened her mouth to respond, and then stopped because Head started removing his shirt she had been carefully not looking for weeks now, averting her eyes when he changed, focusing very intently on literally anything else but. Now she was going to be in his bed, and there was nowhere else to look, and he shrugged the shirt off his shoulders and it pooled on the floor. Rowan gaped. His shoulders were broader than Shed realized, tapering down to a narrow waist, and when he moved she could see the play of muscle beneath his skin. He caught her staring, paused. "I can put it back on if you prefer," he said. "No," she exclaimed. "Not at all. I mean, you don't have to. I mean, whatever you'd like," she grimaced. Feeling heat flood her entire body, Leander sat on the edge of the bed slowly, his expression softer than Shed ever seen it. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here, and I'm sorry you have to do this. It's my job." Rowan managed, trying very hard not to let her gaze drop. Healer and all, he gave her a kind look. "I doubt your job description includes getting into bed with a man who is it your lover?" She became all flustered at the word lover, or getting accused of being the king's mistress when you are not, Leander added, his voice low and rough. "That I am not indeed," Rowan replied far too loudly. He stared at her. She stared back. The bed was huge, but still, it was only one bed, and they were all in the same bed, and they were all in the same bed, and they were both about to be in it, and he wasn't wearing a shirt. "We should sleep," he said, still looking at her. "Absolutely," she replied, slightly breathless. "It's what we're here for." The problem was the size of him. He was large. The bed was large, and yet somehow there wasn't enough room, because his presence filled the space the way his presence filled every room. She could feel the heat of him from 2 feet away, could smell his scent, and smell his scent, and smell his scent, and smell his scent, and smell his stronger here surrounding her, soaking into her lungs with every inhale. "You are very rigid," he said into the dark. "I am trying not to touch you," she replied. "I appreciate the effort. You're welcome." Another silence, heavy and charged. Then slowly she felt the mattress shift, felt the air move. His hand found hers in the dark, his fingers wrapped around hers, warm and calloused and solid, and the contact sent a shock up her arm that settled somewhere in her chest. She squeezed back, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. He fell asleep, her hand in his breathing evening out into something deep and peaceful. Rowan lay beside him in the dark and tried to calm her racing pulse. She bit her lip and willed herself to go to sleep. It took a very long time. At some point during the night, her fingers relaxed in sleep and slipped free. He jolted awake within minutes, his breathing sharp and panicked, his body going rigid beside her. "I'm here," Rowan whispered, reaching for his hand again in the dark. But instead of taking her hand, he moved. She felt him shift, felt the mattress dip, felt strong arms wrap around her and pull her against his chest. He did it half asleep, not fully conscious, just a reflexive movement that settled her against him like she belonged there. Rowan didn't go back to sleep for a very long time. Chapter 4. A week later, Rowan woke in the Alpha King's arms. And for a few blissful, half-conscious seconds, it was heaven. His chest was warm against her back. His arm was wrapped around her waist, holding her close. She could feel his breath against her hair, and her body fit against his like it had been designed for exactly this purpose. Then her brain caught up with her body and panic flooded in. What is it? What is he going to do when he wakes up? She tried to shift away carefully, slowly, but the moment she moved, his arm tightened around her. He made a low sound in his sleep and pulled her closer, tucking her more firmly against his chest. Rowan bit back a moan. She could feel everything. The warmth of his bare skin where her nightgown had ridden up slightly. The steady thump of his heartbeat against her shoulder blade. The way his hand had spread possessively across, and beneath the panic there was a pull. Deep and aching and impossible to ignore. Like she needed to be closer still. Like there wasn't enough contact. Would never be enough contact. Her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, pressing forward and behind her. Leander's breathing changed. She felt him wake. The way his body went rigid. The way his breathing hitched. When he realized the position they were in, he froze, and Rowan squeezed her eyes shut. But then he pulled her closer. Drew her in until there was no space left between them at all. Every inch of him pressed against her back. And he buried his face in her neck and inhaled deeply. Like he couldn't help himself. A low groan rumbled through his chest. Then he was gone. He pulled away, so abruptly she nearly fell backward into the empty space he left behind. She heard him move across the room, and then the door to his dressing room slammed shut. Rowan lay there in the tangled sheets, her heart racing. What just happened? The warmth when they were close. The hollow ache when they parted, even for a day.